If you're doing that, I honestly don't care if you're straight, gay, lesbian. I have no interest in any of that stuff. But if we're hiring you and you're talking about you want to increase diversity, that's not your job. Your job is to protect the families in the state of California, in LA, minimize these fires, and quite frankly, they failed royally, Piers.
So today we have Patrick Bet David. He's a guest on the Piers Morgan Uncensored show on YouTube. And yeah, as you can see, what are they talking about? Nothing, well, the LA fires, of course, wildfires in Los Angeles, which have been raging more or less out of control. And there's a lot of talk all over the place about why the Los Angeles Fire Department is so obsessed with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why it seems to value diversity, equity, inclusion over competence. And yeah, these are very good questions. And, you know, so it's not just in hiring, but why are you hiring people on that basis at all? And what impact does this have downstream? So, for example, apparently one of the reservoirs, a key reservoir, which would have provided water for the firefighters fighting the Palisades fire, that reservoir was proved to be empty, which means the firefighters didn't have water to fight the fire. Why was it empty? Well, we won't get into it in this video, but let's just basically say incompetence is why it was empty. And why is there so much incompetence? Well, could it have something to do with affirmative action and DEI hiring policies? Let's get into it, see what Piers Morgan and Patrick Bet David have to say.
Because you have access to those resources, but unfortunately, he's just not using it.
You tweeted on January 9th, fire every one of these overpaid DEI hires ASAP. One was the LA Department of Water and Power CEO, Christina Crowley, the first LGBTQ fire chief, Christina Kepner, the first lesbian assistant chief, LAFD, Christine Larson, LAFD's first black lesbian equity bureau chief. Now, when you lay it out like that, it looks like DEI gone nuts. I have to say in her defense that Christina Crowley, I think, has actually performed quite well. I've been more impressed by her than I certainly have by Newsom or by Karen Bass. I mean, now you've had a few days to watch her. Would you agree with that? Or do you still think that these were all hires because of a mindset?
Well, when you get hired and then you say, I can't tell you what percentage it is for me to increase the DEI levels of hires of firefighters to be women because I think it's too low right now, you don't make any sense to me. That you lose credibility when you speak that language. The language of somebody you hire as an executive. And I've hired many, where you're paying them a multi six-figure salary to solve a problem. I'm not expecting that person to come and tell me and say, I'm gonna hire more white male than ever before. I'm gonna hire more people from Jersey than ever before. I'm gonna hire more female than ever before. An investor, a CEO is gonna sit there and say, I'm sorry, I don't care where they're from, just get somebody that can do the job the right way. Leadership isn't about what skin color you hire. I don't care if you're black, white, Asian, 29, 68, 53, 8-year degree, 4-year degree. Do you get the job done on a timely manner, extremely urgent, and are you somebody that's anticipating a future crisis from taking place and you're getting ahead of it with 5, 10, 15 ways of looking at saying, if this happens, we're gonna do this. If this happens, we're gonna do this. We have this ready for this. We're using these resources for this. We're producing these cameras because out of the last 200 fires that were started, 68% of them were started here. So we're spending $800 million of putting camera in these areas to see the movements of the fire getting started, to be able to prompt and give us an alert. Give me some of those things as a problem solver. If you're doing that, I honestly don't care if you're straight, gay, lesbian. I have no interest in any of that stuff. But if we're hiring you and you're talking about you want to increase diversity, that's not your job. Your job is to protect the families in the state of California, in LA, minimize these fires, and quite frankly, they failed royally, Piers.
What's going to happen, Patrick? I mean, you're the best person to ask about this, the insurance element of this. We know that insurance companies began removing cover for a lot of people before these fires because they said that their companies would simply not be viable if they didn't. We obviously know that after all this, two things are going to happen. One is that premiums are going to go through the roof for everyone who's got an existing fire policy. But secondly, I would imagine that the insurance companies, in relation to fire cover in LA, they're all going to run a mile, aren't they? I mean, if they were already doing that before this, who's going to want to insure anyone against fire in Los Angeles? And even if they do, who can afford it?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. When we started, you said something at the beginning. You said California's preventing insurance companies from banning, from canceling their insurance protection in the state of California. Fortune's article says California bans insurance cancellation in LA fire-affected areas. You don't get to determine that. That's not how business works. There's the right to represent customers that you want. You ever gone to a restaurant and it says, we have the right to refuse. We have the right to refuse. You have the right to refuse. Yeah, you could be offended by it, but you have the right to refuse. Let me give you an interesting story. I bought a boat here in Florida 4 years ago. My insurance company, Chubb, said you need to have a captain on it because you're not a captain. You've never had a boat before this size. I said, no problem. One day my captain's not available. I decide to take the boat out myself. Would you like me to take a boat out where you're insuring, and if I crash it, would you like to protect that boat knowing a person who is not a qualified captain is willing to go out there? Would you like to put that risk on the captain itself, myself, without any insurance? Piers, what would you and I do with somebody like that?
Right, obviously.
You wouldn't insure him.
Yeah.
So guess what happened 2 days later? I got a letter from Chubb with my picture on it saying, we noticed you posted this and there was no captain there.
Wow.
Because of that, we're dropping your insurance policy.
Wow.
And it was an Instagram video that they showed proof, and they were right. I lost my policy with Chubb. You know what happened when they did that?
That's actually a pretty funny story, and sort of a wake-up call to everybody who posts their life on Instagram or other social media accounts. So, I mean, it's fair play to Patrick Bet-David for telling that story, because it doesn't make him look good. He went out on this boat, basically took it out uninsured because the insurance company said he had to have it piloted by a captain. Interesting story. And of course, insurance companies, they can just refuse. Either they can just jack up premiums so high that nobody's going to pay them anyway, or they can just refuse to provide certain types of cover. Or if California, and I wouldn't be surprised if a state like California says this, if the lawmakers in California say, well, if you're an insurance company, if you want to do business in our state, you must provide fire coverage, and it must not exceed, the premiums must not exceed a certain ceiling. Well, if that ceiling is lower than what the insurance companies want, they probably just won't operate in California, quite simply. That would be my guess. So this will be interesting to see. And this whole idea of the insurance companies, this also brings up an interesting topic. The idea of the insurance companies, those guys know. Like, if they know what they're doing, they absolutely know what they're doing. They know things. And obviously, they're obviously also monitoring social media, the internet. They've got big data on their side. They know, like, if you give them your name and your details, if I say, well, I'm a 59-year-old man living in X place, and I live here and I do this and my health is like this, they basically know when you're going to die. They have statistics for going back decades, if not centuries, of all sorts of things. Not just about health insurance, but also for things like fire cover. They know what's going on in California, in the places where they offer fire cover. They know what's going on there. That is their job. They are professionals. So this can get into a whole lot of other areas, like, okay, what do the insurance companies know about climate change, for example, and all that? But that's a subject for a different video. Very interesting story there by Patrick Bet-David. Let's see if he continues on with anything else.
I wasn't offended by it. They're right. I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah.
I've been in the insurance industry now for almost 25 years, and I'll never forget when my agents would come up to me with one of their relatives, and they would say, well, yes, this person's 280 pounds and 5'3", but everybody needs life insurance. Why wasn't AIG or whatever the company approving this person? I said, look, let's forget the company. Set aside the company's name. Let's flip it. Let's say you have $100 million that you're insuring people. Let's replace this person's name from being your aunt, and let's just name this client John Adams. If the profile of the person's health comes to you, height and weight, would you put $100 million of your money that you put as an insurance company, would you risk $1 million of it with this person saying they're healthy? Absolutely not. Why would you expect an insurance company to do that? That totally makes sense. We got everybody to be thinking about like underwriters. They're thinking like business people. Let's go to insurance today. Do you know 7% of loans in California are not being closed because when the homeowner, the person that's buying the house, when it comes to the end, and they're like, yeah, great, I like the loan amount, I can afford to pay for it. And then the premium for insurance comes, they're like, oh, I can't afford this.
Yeah.
Honey, we can't afford to pay this much. They're canceling it.
Yes, I read that.
My pastor from LA, who's a pastor of one of the biggest churches in California, 20,000 plus members, he gave me his permission to share his name. We talked about it on the podcast. Pastor Dudley Rutherford, 38 years he's been paying homeowners insurance in California. A week before the fire, one of the biggest insurance companies in California send them a letter saying, we're canceling the homeowners insurance. We can't afford it no more. Do you know how many companies are leaving the state of California? And by the way, it's so easy for politicians to say, you can't do that. You can't leave our state. Guess what? They also left Florida. So it's not like I'm taking shots at California. Homeowners insurance companies, some of them left Florida because of hurricane. Makes sense. Why am I taking? Now California is saying, no, you have to protect these homes. Even in the risk areas, you have to do this. No, I'm not going to do this. Guess what? We're out. Geico left a couple of years ago saying we're shutting down all our offices. More insurance companies are. But by the way, Piers, 4 years ago, COVID happened. 5 years ago, COVID happened in California. They had the first negative net migration since 1851. It's never happened, right? And that was due to the handling of COVID.
All right. So, yeah, very interesting what he's saying about the insurance companies. It's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out in the medium term and long term, and the impact it will have on California and businesses in California and doing business in California and living in California. I think more and more people are going to leave California. And of course, a lot of people in states to where Californians are migrating are often not happy with the influx of Californians because they bring their Californian politics with them. I know that from personal experience. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and so I was born in 1965, so even in the 80s, even way back in the 80s, when I finished high school in 1983, but even back then, people were starting to complain about the Californians moving into Oregon. And in the 90s, for sure, well, certainly in the 90s, they were complaining about house prices being pushed up. And I remember, because back in the 90s, I was considering moving back to the Portland area. And house prices already had been going up quite a bit back then. Now they're just insane in Portland. And the Californication of Portland and other parts of Oregon is, I don't know if it's complete, but it is so far advanced that Oregon has a lot of work to do before it can get back to anything like it was when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. So, yeah, that is the problem. People, I'm sure, will be leaving California, and they will be like a horde of locusts will be destroying the places they go to, unfortunately. Anyway, very interesting stuff here from Patrick Bet, David, and Piers Morgan. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you have anything interesting or useful to say about this, I would be glad to hear from you. And in the meantime, I will see you in the next video.